Yo, what's going on, guys? Chris Barnes here, Overtime Athletes, and continuing our series on the vertical jump and how to develop an elite vertical jump. For this video, what I want to get into is some of the principles that you need to be doing in your training. This is going to deal mostly with your strategic plan or your actual periodization of your actual training. In the last video, we went over some of the key factors, and this is basically like a checklist of all the things that you need to be doing within your actual training program. And here I want to start to break it down into what that training actually looks like. Hey, real quick, if you're interested in the entire program, you can check out the link down below. It'll be coming out soon, where it's basically everything that I'm giving you into a full program. All right, guys, let's get right into principle number one, which is when developing an elite vertical jump, there is there's a proper sequence that you need to be following in your training. And what this means is there's each intricate phase builds on top of the next to ultimately peak that athlete, okay? So you need to focus on one modality at a time before moving to the next, and that next modality basically works off the previous. Let me give you an example. If you were to build a high performance race car, you wouldn't essentially put 1,000 horsepower, upgrade the engine with a supercharger and all these different things without first touching the frame, the suspension, the transmission. Because if you were to go ride that car, you could potentially blow it up, things happen, the brakes wouldn't be able to handle it when you go to turn, everything like that. So there has to be an actual intricate sequence. I'm gonna get into that in the next video when I discuss modified triphasic. But the other thing that you need to just think about as an example is, if an athlete comes to you in the beginning of the off season, you're not gonna, week one have them performing high intensity rebound vertical jumps, right? So you need to start with that base and build off of it from there. And that's principle number one. All right, guys, so for principle number two, when it comes to training performance, especially elite vertical force, we need to understand that training the body, maximum stress equals maximum adaptation. All right, so now that we have a proper sequence and we understand that each sequence builds on top of each other, we need to understand that within that sequence, we need to maximally stress that modality, okay? If you're training eccentrically and deceleration, you need to maximally stress that and not focus on other things, right? So as an example, okay? So say I was to give you $1 million for every pound of lean muscle that you added over the next 90 days, right? Pretty crazy, right? But would you spend your time on mobility, on cardio, on strength training, on hang cleans, on running, on jumping? No, you would spend every waking hour that you had figuring out how you can recover and how you can elicit hypertrophy and continue to rep on, on the big compound movements or isolating certain things like your bicep and chest and stuff like that. Basically, at the end of the day, you would try to elicit hypertrophy as much as you possibly can, okay? So in the same sense, vertical jump is the same way. Like I said, if you're training rate of force development, you need to maximally stress that one particular modality, okay? So proper sequence, and in that actual sequence, whatever phase you're in, you need to stress that one thing maximally to get the greatest adaptations. Which leads us into principle number three, which actually builds off principle number two. Your jump training or your dynamic training must match your strength training or your resistance training, right? They have to align and make sense, all right? So if you're training eccentrically on your back squat in that particular modality, then you need to be training deceleration, right? Which is the pre-stretch phase in your actual jumping. Okay? I see a lot of guys and I see a lot of programs out there that are just kind of mindlessly jumping while performing some other form of strength training, okay? Does just elevating your absolute strength and jumping, does it help? Yes. Will it increase your vertical? Yes, but I'm talking about really pushing that ceiling as far as optimizing your vertical force. And to do that, your training, your jump training must match the actual strength training, resistance training that you're performing. So if you're performing deceleration works, or how to absorb and accept force when you're jumping, right? And then on your actual lifting, you're performing concentric focused work where it's more or less focused on rate of force development, you're off. It doesn't make sense to the last principle, principle number 2 that we discussed, where we want to maximally stress that one modality. All right, guys, which leads us into principle number 4. Now, this one is going to contradict the other 3, but let me go ahead and get into this. So you must perform low-level plyometrics throughout the entire training block that you have. All right, so if you're in off season and you want to elevate your vertical jump, right, and you have the next 4 months, you need to be performing low-level specific jumps throughout the entire training block. All right, the parameters for this is they must be specific, they must be low stress, right, and really at the end of the day, the focus is having those continuous jumps, right, to train those motor patterns, right? It's going to increase your synchronization of your body. So let me give an example real quick. If you were training for a fight, right, you wouldn't just focus on getting bigger and stronger and let all your training amount to the last phase where you finally start throwing punches. No, you actually need to train that actual motor pattern throughout the entirety of your training to get better at throwing the actual punch. Well, jumping is no different, right? You can't just focus on deceleration and not perform the full jump, because you actually get better and more efficient at the actual jumping as you perform those low-level, low-stress movements throughout the entirety of the training block. So again, it contradicts it, but I stress that it needs to be low-level, because the amount of stress while you're focusing on training that one specific modality to overall amount to peaking that athlete. So I hope that helps, guys. Those are 4 principles of laying the groundwork to really develop an elite vertical jump. In the next video, what I want to do is I want to get into that actual proper sequence and how we stack those blocks on top of each other. I appreciate you guys watching. I'll holler at you next time.